All right. Hey. It's been like, 2 weeks since we've been doing this, so it's good to be back on.
Yeah, very excited. A lot of things coming.
Yep.
Some good Baptist things are approaching, the Southern Baptist Convention. So
So,
getting pumped up.
yes. Well, look, welcome to another episode of OTXNT. Today, right, Andrew, you're going to be this is one that you're actually going to be at convention. I was going to be at convention, but I can't because of a conflicting obligation that I have. I'll be with kids at kids camp. But next year I will be. But so you've been a little bit more up on what's coming. And so today, you're the one. What are we doing? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I thought we'd talk about kind of the big issues that we kind of expect the Southern Baptist Convention to face this year. If you watched our video last year after the last convention meeting, you'll remember that the Southern Baptist Convention officially exists like 2 or 3 days a year, and then we go back to our churches. And so in the meantime, we have committees that kind of stand and run some things, but the existence of the Southern Baptist Convention really only lasts for about 2 or 3 days a year. And so it's kind of a big deal. We handle some big business. We make the news typically if there's anything negative. But generally, it's a good time of celebration, launching new missionaries, reports on training and education, evangelism, church planning. And so there's a lot of wonderful things. But there's a couple hotbed issues that we're facing, and I thought we might kind of dig into one of those, if not a couple others. And the significant one is looking at the churches that the executive committee removed, the credentials committee removed from the convention based upon primarily the issue was women pastors. And this was kicked off really with Saddleback Church 2 years ago at this time, ordaining 3 women elders. And since the conversation has kind of expanded, and so these churches that were removed are appealing that removal. And so the convention has the opportunity to vote to keep them in the convention or uphold the credential committee's ruling. And so I wanted to look at some of those arguments that were being made by these churches and just kind of get your ideas and talk through what we might expect.
Hey, man, that sounds good. I think, I think hearing the appeals, I think maybe looking at, because some of this stuff actually seems to be somewhat connected to that video that we did a little while ago of just kind of arguments that could be made that are trying to be made against the position that you and I hold, which is that the office of pastorate is reserved for a man. And so I think it'll be helpful to look at some of those things and just be able to engage them and say, do we think there's some validity to maybe the critique that's being responded back to those, and because they share a different of opinions. So yeah, man, I'm ready to roll. I'm ready to talk through it with you.
Well, let's pray, and then we'll just jump in here and take some time.
Let's do it.
Join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. So how do we begin, man? Because as I'm looking, you and I kind of in the prep for today, we've got like 3 or 4 different things to juggle through. So where do you think we start on this?
I think we might want to handle arguments based on their quality, which it's hard to level them because a lot of the quality is pretty poor. But I think actually the lowest quality arguments come from Rick Warren himself. So if people are waiting to hear from that, I think we could just lead in with Rick Warren's statement of appeal.
Okay, so this is the appeal. Just to clarify, this is the appeal that he is proposing be made, that people will hear in hopes to reinstate Saddleback and maybe actually start a movement in the convention towards something different.
Right.
Okay, so what do we got?
All right, so I just wanted to actually real quick try to pull the statement from the credentials committee, but I don't want to take too much time with that. Essentially, last year at the Southern Baptist Convention, the request from the messengers had been, leading up to the convention, to remove Saddleback Church for its very public ordaining of 3 women elders. And the credentials committee kind of had sat on that, and then they had proposed an amendment that was kind of taken, I think, by many messengers as kicking the can and not making a judgment. And the messengers rejected the credential committee recommendation. And so what happened is the credentials committee pulled that question back. So they did not rule on the status of Saddleback, but they pulled it back. And somewhere, let's just see here, the date of this was February. The credentials committee finally made a ruling because there was a certain amount of time, and they judged Saddleback and several other churches not in friendly cooperation. So happening this year, Saddleback and these other churches have the opportunity to appeal this decision to the whole messenger assembled at New Orleans this year. So this is what's going on. And so as the ruling was made in February, some churches have now publicized their appeal so that the messengers can have a vote. And so Rick Warren gave 5 reasons. You know, Rick Warren, he's got the 5 purposes of the church. He likes number 5. He's got his 5 reasons for why. So I thought we might just go through these. His first reason for appeal is, on behalf of SBC women, spiritual gifts are being wasted instead of empowered for the Great Commission. The Great Commission Baptists believe that Jesus authorized every woman to go to make disciples, to baptize, and to teach, just as he authorized every man. So there you have it. That's probably his strongest argument. There is some Bible in there. There's not a whole lot of Bible in the other ones, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that true? Are Baptists wasting women?
Well, let me start with the second part of that. The Great Commission Baptist believes that Jesus authorized every woman to go and make disciples and baptize and teach, just as he authorized every man. Jesus said that. I don't really have any problem with that. Like, that's legit. However, as if we want to get into that, that's his, I think, his linchpin of his whole argument for why he thinks this qualifies as if, like, the Great Commission, because Jesus gave it to all of his disciples to go and to do those things. That is the argument for why you should be able to have female pastors, almost as if, like, the rest of the New Testament doesn't matter in terms of its reflection on those things. Or I would say the better way to say it is almost as if the rest of the New Testament doesn't have any way to speak into or to clarify what is meant there. And I think that's what we would say, right? Is that okay, that's true. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, truth be told, I don't think there's anything wrong with women making disciples, baptizing, and teaching. Now, there's some caveats to how that should be done and the context in which those things are done. And you can go back and watch our video about how that should play out when we take a look at 1 Corinthians, as we look at 1st and 2nd, 1 Timothy 2 and 3. But yeah, I don't think that there's that statement. I don't understand how they're being wasted if we're simply not, if we're saying that the pastorate is not for them. So I take offense to that, right? Because I don't think that, I mean, okay, let's just stop for just a second and think about this, right? Because this, if we can, right, this is, what is being stated here is that churches that choose to not are essentially wasting the spiritual gifts of your female congregants, right? When you don't do that. Okay, what about, let's just take that argument. So what to say about Paul putting in those requirements for those churches that, as you'll see, one of the other churches that is wanting to appeal just says, yeah, those were things for their churches, for their time. So are we saying that it was okay for Paul to temporarily restrict and waste the talents of the women in those congregations? That's okay, but not today. We know better. Like, I just feel like this is a whole mix, and it's not a good statement of what he's saying. Because if you're going to go that way and say that everything that Paul said in 1 Corinthians and in 1 Timothy, if that's not really applying to the church as a whole, if those are out specific situations, then essentially what you're saying is, though, in those two situations, he also, really wasted his women, the women's gifts there too. So I think that's not a good, smart statement if you want to say it like that. So sorry, I think that's what I got so far.
But I remember even in our PhD seminars on hermeneutics, this was one of those questions for discussion. And this was one of the reasons given, we're wasting the talents. And I remember hearing that at the time, saying, well, doesn't Paul say, don't have many of you strive to be teachers? Isn't there a certain amount of limitation taking place in the New Testament because there's a higher accountability? And then there are just reasons given for how you take the general commission to go and tell, and then say there's limitations on how that has to be practiced and who should practice which pieces of it. And so to say that everybody is doing all these things all the time or is authorized blankly by Christ to do these things kind of misses, like you said, the rest of the New Testament. And the rest of the New Testament shows how this played out, how they worked on some of the contentious things that took place in the churches. And, this kind of reminds me of N.T. Wright's argument that the women were commissioned to preach the resurrection because they witnessed Christ's body being absent from the tomb. And the angel said, go tell. There's a difference between going and informing people of what took place and pastoring a church in an office of pastor, which is what the Baptist Faith and Message discusses. And you could argue, when Rick Warren actually spoke to the convention last year, he says, I don't want to get into the issues of the gifts of pastoring versus the office of pastoring. And then he said, I just want to let you know, I love y'all. And I'm like, well, please do. Please give us some reasons. It's not like we're just looking forward to kicking out. There are people that have maybe not liked Rick Warren and his personality and his church style. There's animosity there, depending on what side of the fence you are on the purpose-driven model. That's not where I'm coming from. And I don't think that's where the Credentials Committee is coming from. We're coming from a place of there is a certain amount of understanding that women are called to teach other women. They are called to teach children. There might be some ways for special subjects where women can teach in an institution, transferring knowledge. But in God's church, the office of pastor and the authority that coincides with that office is limited to men, according to our confessional statement. While both men and women are gifted for service in the church, the office of pastor is limited to men as qualified by Scripture. And so when you ordain women elders, and then when you leave and the church calls a husband and wife team to be pastors, and then since this, I think one of the campus pastors resigned and a woman has taken over one of the campuses as pastor. These things insinuate an office. And so how are you in agreement with our confessional statement, the Baptist Faith and Message? I think we've got one more women's video to do to talk about all the wonderful women servants listed in the New Testament and how wonderful it is for Priscilla, for Phoebe, for Junia, for these ladies, Lydia, what God did through them and how blessed the church is because of them. I think we should talk about that. But to assume that they're pastoring because they're listed is just not congruent with what we know from the rest of the New Testament and church history. So
I'd say so. And I think, I think let's talk about wasted for just a second. I think a lot of spiritual gifts are wasted just by people not engaging and doing their job to begin with. Like we should be more concerned about that, right? Like men and women should be participating in the Great Commission. I mean, look at your church body and how many of them are actually participating in those things. I think we should be pushing our people. I think that, we should be saying, more. We want more women going out to be evangelists for the sake of the gospel. Go meet people, go make disciples, and men, get off your rear and do it too. So I think that's where the real waste is as a whole. Well, when you don't, and your approach is, let's just let people come to church. And hopefully that does our witness job. You've wasted a potential, tons of that. But anyways, let's move on. What's the next one that he gives then?
The next one is on behalf of over 300 concerned pastors. That's the approximate number that Warren said have written him who have women pastors on staff. Those churches are fearful and worried over the new inquisition that will target them for disfellowship, he noted. This is right out of the Baptist Press article. So he's been encouraged by other pastors who either are sympathetic to his situation or who are themselves harboring women pastors in certain roles within their own churches. So Rick Warren is the voice piece of these other churches who, like him, are out of step with our confessional statement, the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And again, it's somewhat ambiguous, right? Who are they? Of course, they don't necessarily want to give their names because the Inquisition is coming. It's not really hard. You just do kind of a web page search and you look for the word pastor and see who's attached to it. But these are some things that I think are problematic. And I think what really is going on is Rick Warren is really trying to see if there's been enough movement towards culture on this issue to either turn the convention and have us either ignore or amend our Baptist Faith and Message, or is it enough to split the convention over this issue, and that either creates a divided convention, and who knows who wins, right? Yeah. And I don't think Rick Warren is really. Rick Warren's not even pastor of Saddleback Church anymore, right?
I don't think so. I think
he resigned. You kind of like, well, why are you the mouthpiece for this? Why isn't the new guy the one that's leading the charge here? And it's because the new guy probably has very little affiliation to Southern Baptist life at all, because Saddleback is Saddleback.
Yeah.
So I think that this is really Rick Warren trying to move the convention his direction, and it's a very divisive move. But I don't know. What do you think about the 300 pastors he's writing on behalf of?
Oh, well, and we know the number is much larger than that of that. There's way more than that have not been dealt with in terms of that. But I don't understand if yeah, I mean, as I read that, right, that there's 300 and they have that and they're fearful and they're worried. Like, what are they worried? At the end of the day, right? What are they worried for? See, the difference of what we have in our polity is that what do you lose, right? You lose the fellowship with other Southern Baptist churches only in the sense that you have a vote, and you lose the cooperative program, and whatever resources might come. But let's say that there does come a change, right? And we definitively take a stance. Like, none of those churches are going to have the same problem that like conservative leaning churches will have as these moves are being made by some of the mainline denominations, right? Those churches lose their property. Those churches lose their money in their bank accounts because it all belongs to. I was just listening to something going on in the United Methodist Church, right? Like, churches that do not play by their rules are truly, those guys lose everything. I just don't understand. And let's face it, right? Rick Warren and Saddleback are not truly concerned about this. As he even said here, this at the very beginning, right? That we're not challenging for Saddleback's benefit. No one wants to stay where they aren't wanted. That's what he says. But you and I both know, right? In our conversation that we had with him in Phoenix years ago, that was probably 13 years ago, maybe it's 12 years ago. He had flat out said, like, yeah, we don't need the convention. But they need us, that kind of a thing. And so, like, I don't think anything is lost. I'm not saying there's no benefit to being Southern Baptist, but what you fearful, disfellowshipped, you're going to keep whatever fellowship that you have with all your people. It just means you don't get to go to the convention and vote and cast any direction anymore. So I don't know. I find that to be, and look, I love being a Southern Baptist. I'm not saying that there's no benefit to this, but I just find what fearful. There's nothing to be afraid of because we don't have a polity that in a convention. Our convention is so much different than churches that really have everything on the line. If they truly were held to this convictional stance, right? We need to do this. I mean, the idea that
you won't get seminary discount for your tuition anymore. And maybe you'll have some limitations, or you'll have a higher pay-in for Guidestone Financial. That you can still purchase products through both. It's just, there's some goodies that you'd be lacking on, but those goodies are actually subsidized by the fact that these churches should be giving a portion of their tithes. So if they wanted to figure how much they're giving to the convention, if they got removed and set that aside for these other things, pastoral pension and pastoral education, they'll probably save money. So yeah, there's not going to be any major loss to them other than affiliation of being connected with the largest evangelical body in America. And I think that does mean something. But anyway, thank goodness Rick Warren is fighting this fight. At least he's pushing for clarity. I'm not so sure it's going to go in the direction that he's pushing for. I hope it doesn't, because if they're refellowshipped, it means that we have officially chosen to ignore our confessional statements, because on the basis of no argument here on, I don't have women in the office of pastor, I have women acting as shepherds of ministry groups at my church according to their gifting. That would be an argument that we could actually engage with and talk about scripturally. I still don't think it holds muster, but that's not even being made. The case is just saying, hey, when they're going for the gusto, they're trying to get everything. All right, the next one. You've got the next one. You want me to read it?
Well, let me just say this real quick. I want to say this because I heard something this past week I think is important to say to all of this as we're talking through it. I listened to Justin Peters talk about this the past week, and he said, and I think this is a big problem. I think I don't know where he was coming from this, but he said that if we choose to disfellowship Saddleback, but refuse to do anything else, then we are engaging in unjust weights and measures, and that you just need to let it happen and bring them back in. Otherwise, because I don't think that we have the ability to take this all on. And I do think there was I'm just going to judge that statement that he was making. And I say that, look, I would understand that if we're just going to go after Saddleback and say, yeah, we're just going to take a stab at this one. They're the big fish. Let's just go after them. Then, yeah, I would say that's unjust weights and measures. But if what we're saying here is, this is opening up an opportunity to have a real conversation about what we truly believe and what it should mean to cooperate, then let's have it. And then let's make the final decision. And let's not just make this about one church. Let's make this about, do you believe these things and will you align with them or not? Because depending on how this conversation goes too, if it goes a different way, there are going to be a lot of other churches like ours saying, do we believe these things and do we still cooperate? Right? Like we don't just sit to go along just to get along. We're not doing that. Right. And so I think that statement that he was making, I think part of that was to just kind of, I don't know where he was coming from with that, but
it's baloney. And I think a lot of it is people want to make peace and they're afraid of the fallout. They're afraid that this is really going to tear the convention apart, and it might need to. But part of the issue that he's missing is that Rick Warren scandalized the Southern Baptist Convention. Either he's right and what he did was just, and we have been in error for a long time, or he's in error and he publicly did something that was so provocative that it forced the convention to reckon with it. So this is not about unjust. People weren't hunting down documents secretly hidden at Saddleback Church. This made all the news nationally, and it was news because everybody knew the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't do this. And so he put himself up to be judged by the convention, and the convention is judging him. Either they'll judge him in a correct place or incorrect, but you don't just let him back in because other churches are getting away with it. What this does is it sets a precedent of, we mean what we say in our confessional statements. We might need to refine what it means to be in general agreement and all that. And there's discussion about that kind of stuff. That's not a bad discussion to have. But he knew what he did was contrary to the way that we have always understood this since 2000. And other churches will voluntarily leave as a result if this stands. And if not, there's going to be a reckoning. It's already been done. That's something if we have time. But essentially, I did the math. There's an amendment being proposed, and they listed, doing a search on every website of every Southern Baptist church, 182 positions of pastor granted to women on SBC websites. So there might be more than that, but we know of 182, and some of those might have multiple people under the same church. So it's not necessarily 182 churches, but 182 women are carrying the title pastor on their church's websites in the SBC. So the Great Inquisition is completed. It's not even that hard. What we'll either do is say you need to revoke this title or this position of office, or you're going to probably be disfellowshipped because we're going to have to rule within our documents or not. How many churches we have in the SBC? I mean,
It's a good question.
Let's just see. Anyway, see. Let's see if we can find it in 20 seconds.
And while you're finding,
yeah,
I will read the next one on the page. Did you find it?
The National Convention had around 10,000 ethnic churches.
That doesn't help the overall number, my friend.
No, I'm sorry. Keep going. All right.
Keep reading. That's not the one we were wanting. I'm sure in those numbers, you will probably find a super slim amount that would have female pastors in those, too, by the way. So just to say. All right, here we go. Here's the next one that he says. This is number 3. Should be decided by the messengers. Those registered to vote at the SBC annual meeting ought to make such a decision and decide if they want the executive committee to act like a Catholic magisterium.
Okay. Ooh, he invoked the word Catholic.
Yes, he did. And not just small letter Catholic. He went big letter Catholic. What are your thoughts on that one?
I did find it, by the way. 47,198 churches.
There we go.
198 women, 182 women pastor titles. I don't think this is going to tear the whole thing apart. I really don't. And there's other Baptist groups that can absorb these churches if they want to go to a group that upholds this view about women pastors.
Yeah.
This is kind of, I think he's right. If you're allowed to appeal, it came from a committee, you get the right to appeal. So appeal. Nobody is saying that they shouldn't have the right to appeal. And I think that a lot of people that might appear sympathetic to his cause are actually just trying to promote the reality that process matters and the right to appeal is not, being pulled away from these churches.
Yeah.
Let's let the messengers decide. I think the part that might be shocking is if the messengers decide overwhelmingly to uphold the decision. I'm a little concerned. It's a very good testing of the water to find out where the Southern Baptists are on this issue. And some of us might be very disappointed, one side or the other, as to how much we've moved or not moved on this issue.
Yeah.
But just invoking the Catholic magisterium, that's just kind of it's a non-starter that nobody's likening the executive committee to that, and nobody's denying them the appeal. So he's kind of appealing just to prove that the process is the process, and God bless him, it is. So I'm ready to move on. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm ready to move on. There ain't much for us to say there. So,
all right. Our goal is to spark the thinking of messengers regarding the direction of the SBC, and that I think is the first real honest deal going on.
Wait, where'd you see that one?
Oh, that's the last one, I think.
No, you skipped 4, man. Let's see.
Hey, I'm sorry. I scrolled too far. Hey, you go ahead. Read 4.
Okay, so maybe we're looking at the same. Here's his reason for. I'm giving. Wait, are you reading? I'm reading. Maybe I'm reading a different.
No, I had Baptist Press and Baptist News. Baptist News has one more than Baptist Press.
I've got Baptist Press. Baptist Press says his 4th is. No, that is, you're right. You read the right one. I'm sorry. I was looking at something completely different. So you're right. Encourage them to think about the direction of the convention. You should cut this from the video, but it won't be. So
it's all right. If they're still with us, they really love Baptist life.
That's right. That's right. So keep going.
Many complex issues are leading to the continued decline of our denomination. Warren predicted the next generation of Southern Baptists will remove the restriction on women one day because truth eventually triumphs over tradition.
Cool.
So again, he's going for everything here. He doesn't care about that office distinction versus the giftedness, and that's why he never made a case for it even last year. That was like he alluded to he had something behind his decision making, but now he's all in. Baptists are wrong. We've been wrong forever, just like all the other Christian denominations before the second wave feminism hit. and truth will win. Okay, we shall see. I think truth has been winning, and we're having a blip of loss with the churches that have rejected the authority of God's word or imported whatever they need to get around it. But yeah, this is he also then, it's subtle. You notice that there's a decline going on, and this decline somehow is tied to this. If we had women pastors, we'd be growing rapidly like all the other churches that have women pastors, which
have you seen the numbers on that? That's an interesting discussion to have, by the way. Oh man.
And again, we're not laughing. We're laughing at the argument, okay, not at churches that are struggling.
No, you're right.
Yeah, the argument is that's the baked in assumption. All of a sudden, American Christianity is declining, and the Southern Baptist Convention is declining with it. And then there's a big age of non-labels and people not wanting to have a denominational tie. And a lot of that factors in. And there's a lot of reasons for decline. Some of it's birth rate. Some of it's, just the general, the West is embracing Satanism. Go see another video of ours. It's a difficult time. If we had women pastors, it would all be better. I think not.
The reason I laughed is because the statistics of look at the steps of all the mainline denominations. They did these steps and it did not save them. And that's where I'm thinking it's comical, is like, up to this point, none of these things that they say that if we would just get right on this, so if we just now follow suit and do like what all the mainline ones did and open this office up, then we would no longer see the decline. I think the decline has nothing to do with that. I think our decline is, like you had said, there's a bunch of stuff that's going on. Part of the decline might also just be, not only is there a cultural sifting, that is going through of like, does it really matter to be a Christian anymore? Is there any benefit to that? Or besides that, I think there's just a decline in evangelism and discipleship that's taken on by every Christian. Like, no, if we want to point some fingers onto that too, why don't we also look at the fact that when we changed how we approach church, which was, bring everybody to the big gathering and we'll get the job done for you. So let's make church cool and let's not talk about doctrine. Let's not talk about the gospel so much. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit, but let's just get you to like us first. I remember the signs of driving down to Tucson, and it was like, I see the signs for the cool church, and it's like, are you bored, but you won't be at our church? Like, I think people just said, okay, cool church was fun for a while, not speaking about the cool church in Tucson, which is now the Bridge, I think. But I'm saying cool churches were fun for a while, but now you're like, oh, there's a lot more fun things I could do than go to a cool, relevant church. So
NFL is cooler, right? And sleeping
Disney
in is cooler.
Going to the parks or a theme park or something. Yeah. You're competing with all of that now. And so I think that let's just talk from a statistics point of view. Doing that is not going to save, and I think they're not tied together in that. I think a lot of those mainline ones you watch, the decline is not because they allowed women in either. So let me clarify that. They had bigger problems and they gave up on a lot of things of importance much longer than that. And this opening it up, thinking if we just push this position here, that we're going to save our rears. No, that's why they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff now, is they're opening up their positions to everything goes, because the ships are about completely underwater. And they're hoping maybe if we just allow anything and everything to be affirmed and ordained, then maybe there's a chance to keep this thing afloat. So I just don't think that has much weight at all.
No, and again, the argument shouldn't have been tied together. He could just say, if you wanted to make a statement and say, all right, we were so wrong on this, that God has put us under a divine curse, and that's why we're shrinking, because we're so wrong on this issue, then you'd have to look at the statistics of the churches that moved and said, well, where'd the blessing go? This just doesn't hold much weight. I agree. Truth will eventually win out. And so I'm not worried.
Yeah.
And
I hope truth wins out at the end of the day.
But it is a little disturbing, and the hermeneutically, it's an issue to say, how did we get it wrong for so long, right? That we just figured out how to read the Bible. That to me is such a major undermining of our principles. And we could go into the slavery discussion because that's where it always ends up, that we were wrong on this or that or the other. But that's a nuanced discussion in itself. But the reality is this argument is it's just nonsense. But it does reveal, like, the reason he hasn't given a nuanced argument of whether we need to update some specific language in our Baptist Faith and Message is because it's not about the office. It's straight up about women, egalitarianism, women and men being able to do all the same things in the church. All right, last one. You got it? Yeah.
On behalf of International Mission Board missionaries, Warren cited a decrease of 1,500 missionaries since 2000. Also, the year of the Revised Baptist Faith and Message. A renewed emphasis on the restriction of women, he said, would lead to losing more godly female church planters and couples serving as pastoral teams. Okay, so if I'm reading this correctly, that once we hit Baptist Faith and Message 2000, that was the beginning of the end for our missionary. We've seen such a decline from that. So interesting. But then the other thing is, here's what I don't understand. Is we have this restriction, he's saying, and it would lead to losing more godly female church planters and couples serving as pastoral teams. Like, what do you mean by pastoral teams? Because as somebody who was a missionary and watched my family as they served as a couple, I don't understand what he's saying, that like as a missionary couple, you should both be considered pastors, kind of like what his church is doing now, where the husband and wife are both the pastors of the church. I'm just not quite, I don't quite understand that. Now, I will say this. I think one of the things he does bring up, which is a very sticky issue, which is, and this probably needs to be had at some point and talked about, is what will happen with Southern Baptist, especially the mission board, as they do mission work in areas where they are building relationships with churches that have female pastors, or they're in places that are starting churches with female pastors. So there is something that I do know that is happening behind the scenes, that the work that's happening internationally is they are working alongside churches that are not Southern Baptist in that regard. And so do we quit the work amongst local church bodies that have that we're trying to work with and partner with? Do they stop as a result of that? Like, there's some real murky questions that need to be asked, especially if we're sending our missionaries overseas there. So that, I think, is an interesting conversation, an important one to have, that there needs to be clarity of what does it mean to be in cooperation as a mission body, and who you can and can't work with, and how that plays out, right? That, I think, holds some weight to have an argument, not an argument, but a real conversation of. But this idea that he finishes that we're losing couples serving as pastor, I don't quite grasp what that's all about. But there you go. Anything you'd say?
Well, again, I would say missionary teams is absolutely a thing. Women can be missionaries, and we've ordained women missionaries, and we salute Lottie Moon and Annie Armstrong as wonderful women missionaries. And so this, again, goes to that broader Great Commission call to all, and a specific call to be an evangelist, be a missionary. But the issue, once again, and this is without precision of language, it really gets to be a pain. Office of pastor, right? There's an office here. And so if we do church plant overseas, and that church has a pastor, that pastor ought to be a man. And that doesn't mean the pastor's wife doesn't have a calling into ministry. I think most of us would praise the Lord that our wives were called alongside us in ministry, and that they have great gifts that help us, and I don't know how I would do what I'm doing without my wife. God bless her. She's got gifts that are very different than mine. And, she complements what I'm doing well. But she doesn't teach or have authority over men in my church, and she doesn't have the office of pastor. So again, we're always trying to kind of throw it all together. And so husbands and wife missionary teams have been a thing, and they continue to be a thing, and no one's saying that they can't be. The real key is that I think your bigger issue is like a single woman as a missionary, often might have to adopt some more progressive ways of interacting if she finds herself delivering the gospel in a mixed group takes place. Those are the kind of things where I'm not like wanting to go in there and shut these ladies up and say, sorry, we got to go find you a man. That's frontline missionary work of bringing forth the gospel. But when the church is established, then we do then move into the New Testament, and the New Testament moved pretty quickly. So I don't think that there's all these women that are saying, I'm called to be a pastor overseas, and we're saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't pastor, and they're going to go find another mission board. That's not what I think is going to happen. But this has been a kind of a sticky issue, I think, for a while, because we recognize the need to get missionaries overseas and to present the gospel. And I think women do have a little more leeway doing that in a place where there's not any real established church. And then we have to think missionally to some degree when we're going to a matriarchal society, and understand that a woman might have an open door in certain places to be the evangelist. Again, women can do these things. We're not saying they can't do these things. What we're saying is that God tends to establish local congregations of believers. And in those local congregations called the church, the assembling, he has established officers, and those officers are pastors and deacons. And so when we get to that phase, it's time to find God's man to lead the church. And we don't diminish the wonderful work of our women missionaries. But so, I mean, yeah, there's a deeper conversation to have here, but are we at risk of losing all our lady IMB missionaries? Absolutely not. And one of the things that I think is a concern here is we pay our missionaries, right? We do a better job paying our missionaries than a lot of groups. And so there's a lot of people who might be wanting to be SBC missionaries who don't truly agree with what we believe. And those should leave, right? If you don't really agree with our confessional statements, then, don't be one of our missionaries because we have a more regular funding method than some other churches.
I would say the same thing. On the other side is people who don't agree with who we are and what we do, but they want to use us for the benefits of our cooperative program giving. I mean, you and I saw this in seminary, right? People who really detested Southern Baptists, but to be a Southern Baptist for 2 years, 3 years, to become, to get seminary trained so that you could get your master's or your PhD, you saw that. And then you see what they do right after they graduate. They get out and we're done. I'm never being a Southern Baptist ever again.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a piece of that we just need to recognize that's happening too. We're using us, even though we don't agree with us as a convention, for those benefits. And then when we're done using them, we'll walk away. And I think that there's definitely a piece of that. By the way, those stats, if you read the Baptist Press, they said those stats aren't true. They said they had a rebuttal in that too, by the way, that said they had actually continued to grow until 2008. And then they had a downturn, but that's actually not that, they started, kind of,
the Great Recession. The Great Recession took place, and it took a hit on giving across the country, and that diminished our ability to continue to grow in our number of missionaries. And then one of the things more recently people forget to mention is the fact that COVID happened and countries weren't allowing foreigners in, and there was a tremendous hit in how missions was operated during the COVID years too. So I was glad you mentioned that. On top of it, his dad is wrong. So again, those are the great reasons why Saddleback is appealing. I will be voting against their appeal and voting for the removal of Saddleback from the Southern Baptist Convention. And it grieves my heart to some degree because I have a copy of The Purpose-Driven Life and The Purpose-Driven Church on my bookshelf. I've personally been encouraged by Rick Warren in many ways. Over the years, he prayed for me at that convention, asked for God's blessing on my ministry. He's kind of a celebrity, and there's a love or hate, thing that goes on sometimes. It's sad to me that he went this far, and it's a bridge too far. But I pray that God will do wonderful things through Saddleback, and that the lost will be saved, and that they'll continue to be a light. And I hope that they'll correct what I believe to be aberrant theology. But I don't appreciate the efforts, I think, intentionally to divide the Southern Baptist Convention in a pretty historic, difficult time.
Yeah. So I just think at the end of the day, I think Baptists we have the prerogative, and we need to to define why we gather, what we gather for, and what we are, right? Because that's helpful. But I will say the waters are getting more murky today. I don't know if you've noticed, and this might be for another conversation for another time, but I do think like today we are getting closer and closer to the days when people say, well, what kind of church are you? And you say, well, we're Southern Baptist. And you now have to kind of ask, well, what kind of Southern Baptist church are you? Right.
Yeah.
Like we are slowly drifting into a time where it doesn't actually mean that you believe the same things, even if you are Southern Baptist anymore. Like we're getting like some of the Methodists and some of the Presbyterians in that regard, where you have to do a little bit digging deeper and find out maybe what this particular church teaches, or what this particular pastor's like, or something like that. Like I do think that that's happening, but I do think to solidify some stuff, to have a talk like this coming up, where we said we're not doing this for the sake of let's just boot out Saddleback, but like let's have the real conversation of what are we binding ourselves to say that we believe, that we are confessing together. That should be helpful, I think, in the future, to say we believe these things, we are this. This is what we, put that out there front and center. And so that'll help down the road to say that this is, you go to this group, this is what this means. This is what they say they believe, right? So I think it should be helpful. I hope we get to that point where it means something. It's whether it means that you're going to go one way or the other. I want it to mean something and not just, it could mean whatever you want it to mean.
No, I think that's good. And again, I know of some Christian cults that are taking off the denominational label. I believe I've seen some of this with the LDS, Mormon churches that are going like a lot of our church plants that are like, I'm the one word that's cool today church. And they're drawing people in thinking it's just another evangelical church. But again, denominations historically meant that you had set beliefs that you agreed to. And that's one of the reasons that if you were a Baptist, you'd find a Baptist church, because you wouldn't have to pour through their theological documents to find out what they believed.
Yeah.
And again, you don't necessarily have to have it in the name, but one of the things that's helpful is it should mean something. Okay, I'm Southern Baptist, which means I actually have a pretty broad tent theologically of where we're at on certain issues, but on specifics like women in pastoral ministry, we do have a stance on that, and that stance is not new. That stance has been around. It was really only challenged as of the 60s, and it was put in the Baptist Faith and Message because of those challenges that took place before the Great Resurgence. But you'd mentioned traditional Baptists and it meaning something. The other group, which we can probably go quickly through, is Fern Creek is more Southern Baptist than most. Female pastor says of appeal. You want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, so this is almost an interesting, it's like the opposite thing that Saddleback was saying. In that, like, Saddleback is not your traditional SBC church at all. Like, if you were to go on, I would say for many people who are at Saddleback, just being someone who used to go to Saddleback and was a member there back in the day, most would have probably no clue what it meant that they were Southern Baptist. If you went through the 101 stuff and the 202, like, you would find out that there's something about that, but it's not a front and center thing. You don't really know that. But anyways, their big thing is that we are more Southern Baptist in how we practice and do church than anybody else. And so some of the things that they said that makes them, we have all the programs. We have strong music program. We have the full missions. They still do GAs and RAs and mission friends and ACT teens and challengers. And they say they're more Southern Baptist than the average church, the average Southern Baptist church. And they give 10% to Great Commission work. So they give 2% to cooperative program, 2% to missions, other missions, 2.5 to their association, and then other ministries, and then 1 to the Baptist Medical and Dental Mission International. That said they're number 9 in their associational giving, and their big thing. So that's the first thing, right? We're more Southern Baptist than almost most Southern Baptists are. I'll grant them that, right? Like, they're doing a lot of the old school Southern Baptist things, but is that enough? Is that what it should mean? Is that we do those? I'm glad that it doesn't mean that you do all those things to remain Southern Baptist. Their big thing too, they said, is how they understand 1 Timothy 2 and 3, And they say they understand it differently than the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. So here's what they said, and then let's interact with that for a second, because we've dealt with this before, but let's talk about the implications of this. They say this, that we truly feel in those particular scriptures that the way that we've looked at those in history is that Paul was talking about particular women at a particular church. The women felt like they had just gained this freedom, I guess, and they felt like in this particular church, if they had questions or needed to speak out, they did during service. And Paul was very adamant about keeping a decorum in church where things were reverent. There was a particular order to the service, and Paul did not like very much the women speaking out in church, from what I understand, and they were not learned like their husbands were. They did not go to Jewish school. And so that's the idea, right? That those passages are not really about, they're not really about a blanket statement about the office of pastor, but they're about specific churches. So I guess in 1 Timothy, you're talking about the church of Ephesus, right? Has some problems, and that's what Paul's speaking to. So any thoughts on that there?
No, but I think that's what we tried to work through. The way that the passages are discarded based on some kind of reimagined historical backdrop allows you to really discount anything you don't like, right? And that's the issue. I mean, we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, the thought of disruption in the service and maybe wanting to maintain decorum seems more in line with the 1 Corinthians 14 passage than it does with the Timothy passage. And so this is another kind of rhetorical device or logical failure. When you take all the different teachings, you lump them together, and then you choose one backdrop from one of them and apply it to all of them to discount all of them. That's why we took great effort to investigate Timothy and Corinth separately. And then you kind of have a hermeneutic of they're not contradictory, right? And if they were contradictory, then we might need to say, okay, perhaps there is something specific to the congregation. But the Timothy passage speaks universally, both in its context of all men everywhere, likewise women, and then the arguments from pre-fall and the fall.
Yeah.
So go see that video if you'd like to know where we're at. Can women pastor a Southern Baptist church?
Which we'll place at the very end of the video for you to watch.
That's right. But yeah, so I'm with you. Again, it's a lot of Southern Baptists fall this way because what happens is it gets said once, it gets said twice, and churchgoers that aren't really digging into the word, they just kind of have that as a built-in hermeneutic when they read those passages and say, oh, this is why this doesn't apply. And that's how a lot of the drift takes place. So that's one of the reasons that we continue to kind of go through these things very carefully and try to work it out. The other thing I saw,
it's the popular way to understand. I think logically you can do this if you stick with the hermeneutic that says, I can supply whatever background I want to, right? Yeah. Which background do I supply? Now, granted, I would say even most people who disagree with our approach, our hermeneutic approach, maybe would say, no, that's unfounded. 1 Timothy is a different context than 1 Corinthians. And so we're not looking at the same thing. But I would say, on the whole, you and I are somewhat unique in from at least our peers when we were in school, because we were reading guys like William Larkin and his approach to hermeneutics in the sense of we cannot supply whatever background that we want to. I think some of that was also from my reading of John Sailhammer, right? The text is sufficient in and of itself. If Paul wanted us to know that this was a crazy problem that was happening, then we would find that in Paul's letter, or Acts would have given us something to go on to show us that these were the issues that were taking place, and then you could read them side by side, possibly, right? There's just nothing. There's no background, and at this point, we're just throwing in, supplying whatever background we want, right? Like even in that those comments that they were being made by this church, it's like, okay, but where do you get that from? And it's from, this is what I've been heard, this is what I've been told, this is what we thought. And really what that is that's just, it's anyone's guess of reading back into what they think was
Yep.
the issue, right? It's not there. There's no documents that you can point to say we know definitively that these were the issues. And I think that's a very it's not a very firm place to stand as an interpretation.
And I would just say, if you're a young seminary student or a pastor, and you've got a commentary that you're using to kind of prep through, it's always really fun to go find one from 30 years ago or 100 years ago and look at the historical backdrop supplied in those prior commentaries. And what you tend to see is that the favored historical backdrop a lot of times favors the contextual cultural time. And so while several options might be proposed in all those commentaries, the one that the particular author leans to tends to be what our culture leans to at a given moment. And that's the first time I noticed that. I was doing a Bible study in Philippians, and it was like the Ephesian imprisonment. And almost nobody's really pushing the Ephesian imprisonment, but there was a period for about 30 years where if you came through seminary, you believed Philippi was written from Ephesus. And now it's Rome again, and it has shifted. I'm a Caesarean guy, just to be different. But nevertheless, that historical backdrop shifts, and it can nuance your interpretation if you allow it to. And, when you don't know, being speculative can be disruptive, especially in 20 years when you find that you're a seasoned pastor and all the other new pastors are preaching a different historical backdrop. And you either have to apologize to your congregation for getting it wrong to stay with the times, or you don't get sucked into that. That's one of the reasons that we're doing what we do, is to say the text gives you enough. There was an imprisonment. It doesn't really matter where it was. I think that Caesarea is a better imprisonment for the prison epistles, because it sounds like Paul was locked up, where Rome, he seemed to have more freedom to move around. So I don't see him locked in a cell in Rome. I see him going about preaching the gospel. That doesn't really change my preaching of the text. It's not like I don't care about history, but what people do with it is they manipulate clear passages because they don't like those passages, and they want to be winsome and appealing to the culture. And we know for certain, taking a stand on women pastors and saying the Bible doesn't support it is going to put us out with the majority of the people in our world, with a lot of us, quote unquote, evangelical Christians. But it's not something we do for the popularity. We do it because that's what the Bible teaches, or at least we believe it always has taught this way, and haven't seen a convincing reason to change our opinions.
I will say this, that I think that's a huge fear for people, that if we really truly go down this road, that our witness to the culture will be shattered. And I truly think that we are, whatever witness that we've got we're already painted as the bad guy, because we have positions that are contrary to the culture today, right? Like culturally, we have moved way past this issue. Culture and churches, main lines gave up on this issue a long time ago. Today, the battle is for whatever letter of the alphabet. And that's the real pressure. And that if you're a traditional church, doesn't matter if you have a full staff of women, and you affirm, biblical sexuality and gender identity, you will have no voice. You will not be seen as a friend. You'll be seen as an enemy. And so I don't think that this is going to do much for that. I think it's going to do some for some Christians. It'll help them figure out which place do you want to go and land. But I will say that these are bold contrasts that you're starting to see, right? Will we maintain a biblical complementarianism? Will we maintain maybe a very traditional approach to how church polity should be run, because we're not letting culture kind of dictate that? I think those bold colors will matter, because you look at some of these other, we want to look at this today, but that's something that's not churches that are taking strong stances on things. I do not think are strong conservative biblical stances. And I'm not talking about just this issue. I'm talking about just in general on practice, on liturgy, things like that. Whatever they do, these things that seem outmoded or those, by the way, are changing, and people are beginning to come back to that. So I do think that just because it's not culturally acceptable anymore, is not a reason to say, well, we need to probably ease up. I think we have to hold to what we believe the scriptures teach, and let things fall where they may. So I'm not nervous about that.
No, and I mean, just going back to this church, when you read the article, what you find is that they 2 points. One, they rejected the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 when it came out and opted to hold to the 1963, which of course they were Southern Baptist Church before the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. And we have not made all our churches sign on to that. It's been the general statement of agreement. And so this is a question that does need to come up at a higher level of, okay, how much affinity do you have to have
True.
with this confessional statement? One of the things I would push back on is to say that there was almost no women pastors in the convention at the writing of the Baptist Faith Message 1963. It was a moot point. And so when Baptists were challenged on this, and we went through the process of opening up the confessional statement and reassessing it and reaffirming it, the National Southern Baptist Convention decided that we do have a statement on pastors, and women were excluded from that office. So they basically said, well, we ignore that. Most churches, when this happened, they broke off and joined a group like the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And this church decided not to, and either in protest or just they didn't feel the need. I would say that at the point when we felt like we needed to address it, the SBC addressed it, and to kind of pretend it didn't happen, I don't think's really honest. The other thing that you see in this article is that they had women deacons long before they had a woman pastor. And this is one of those things in our Can Women Be Deacons, which both of you and I kind of are open to that possibility scripturally. But my position is I wouldn't do it, because it has historically been kind of a stepping stone path to a pastor or priest in denominations with priests.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those things I would say is an example. It doesn't have to be, but it did function where they had women deacons prior to women pastors. And, so I do think it's not a determined slippery slope. If your deacons just if they just serve. But since many of our smaller Baptist churches, the deacons also function like that eldership board, it's a natural consequence to say, well, she's been serving as a deacon. She was on this and this, and now she's going to step in as the pastor. You're already kind of conditioned to accepting that woman in authority over men. So those are two things I think are kind of, they stick out to me in this article. But this will be a sad one to lose. Did you want to respond to that? I got one other thing about this, and I know we're running kind of long.
You respond. And I think there's one other thing we have to say and then be done. Yeah, we're at time, I think.
Yeah. So the bigger thing is that when the Southern Baptist Convention votes, this will be a national determination of who the National Southern Baptist Convention recognizes. The bodies of the association and state conventions operate separately from this. And I think that's one of the things I read on Rick Warren, that he intends to remain in his Baptist Association and Southern Baptist State Convention, even if the appeal fails. And this is one of those things people get very confused of because of our broken hierarchy. And so Ed Litton had spoken and saying, well, we can't really make a ruling on Saddleback because that's an associational task. And that's how they kind of dodged the question a couple of years back. And one of the reasons the Credentials Committee is being asked to make rulings on this is because we increased its authority as a result of the Sex Abuse Task Force. And we gave the Credential Committee the authority to recommend removal of churches. I think they had some maybe before, but we made it a little bit more, put a little more teeth in there. And so even if the churches are removed from the SBC and the removal is affirmed, it doesn't mean that they're going to cease to be SBC and their local state conventions and associations. And so there's going to be some battles that need to be fought really on the ground. And we need some fortitude from our local credentials committeemen and people to take this from on high at the national level and say, this is where we are. Are your associations in line with the Southern Baptist Convention?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, the nose is under the tent, and they're trying to make a headway to change the conversation, to change our theology. And so I think that this battle is not going to be over, even if there is some clarity given at this national convention.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. Well, okay. So here we go from here, right? Let's just do 2 more minutes on this. So this is coming to the floor. And I think I saw June 13th is when they're saying this is coming to the floor, that they're going to be dealing with this. So be looking for that next week. And afterwards, you and I are going to both be tied down next week, but we'll spend some time talking through this stuff when it's all said and done. But June 13th, so it says that's going to take time. That's the afternoon session, June 13th. Okay, so talk to me really just a quick second so far on this amendment issue. And do you think that has a chance? Is that going to the floor, anything like that?
I am not sure if it's, I thought I read from another pastor I follow that the amendment, which I just lost, that the amendment is something that we will get a chance to vote on. I think we may have to vote to put it on the actual business, because I think it's been blocked from the leadership. I could be wrong. Again, I'm a little fuzzy, so forgive me if I'm a little off on that. But there has been an amendment posed and signed on by many churches, and the amendment is trying to handle this issue not at a confessional level, but actually as a organizational, constitutional level. And so the amendment is to Article 3 of our composition, and it adds a point of what comprises the Southern Baptist Convention, and it says, does not affirm, appoint, or employ a woman as a pastor of any kind. And so putting it in our Constitution would add incredible clarity to the point that it would really, it would probably cause a division, right? There's not going to be much left in terms of trying to dodge this. And there's a certain number of pastors that want to have that ability. They're still arguing on the basis of complementarianism. And if I have a woman who is underneath the senior pastor as a man, and I have a woman's children's minister who operates in a teaching capacity only over children, I ought to be able to call her the shepherd of my children's ministry. Unfortunately, the churches that we're dealing with aren't making that case. They've gone much further than that. I think that if the amendment fails, it's going to be because of those churches. I don't think it's wise to use the title pastor. So I'm in favor of this amendment just to solve this issue. I don't want to keep having it pop up over and over again. At the same time, if it fails, it's not because Baptists don't believe this generally. It's because there are churches that are seeing, like Rick Warren said, a giftedness to pastoring and a permission for women to teach women and women to teach children. And as such, some churches have used full-time vocational women in those roles and adopted the title pastor for them. I think it would be wiser to use something like minister, because I think that highlights the complementarianism better. But what I also see is the slippery slope. A woman starts in that role. And even in this last church we talked about, she started as a women's minister and minister to youth. And then she became the senior pastor. So this, in my mind, is why it's not necessarily wise to use the pastor title at all, even though this church didn't even initiate that way. But if it fails, I don't think there should be a great discouragement among conservative Southern Baptists. It's just a matter of we're still going to be fighting the complementarian question with a little more intensity in the coming years.
Yeah, I think that just brings up once again, like I think theologically, every church should be thinking about what does it mean to be a pastor, and what should it mean to have that title of elder, overseer, shepherd. And I think, we have gotten so loosey-goosey with it. I think it was only till the past few years when we were looking to hire somebody new in the previous church I was at, that it really made people want to know, what are we calling them? Are they director, minister, pastor? And I think we just slap pastor onto everything now. And it really made you start to really think through that and say, okay, what should it mean? Why is there a distinction that needs to be made? And I do think it should mean way more. If you're saying you're a pastor, that it should mean way more than I'm siloed into one area. That my shepherding, I think, this is where I land on this. My shepherding also crosses over to the rest of the body of the church, and not just my section, right? So I think you use a different word, but I think that words mean something.
And I think some of this is megachurch oriented, and you have such large groups that you do end up with pastors and people like titles. So you just give them pastor, you don't pay them very well. You give them a title that makes them feel good. I think that there's some of that, and it's not necessarily theologically driven, but I like the title minister, because minister actually means servant, and they're serving the church in this role under the authority of the pastor. So I think it would be wiser to go back to using the term minister or something along those lines. Let's reserve the word pastor. Let's not have a senior pastor and 26 other pastors. Maybe there might be still roles for associate pastor or executive pastor or something precise, especially if those are functioning in elder capacity, maybe in a elder-led governance. But you can see how sticky it gets even trying to clarify this, that there's going to be some room for disagreement on whether or not we want to go this far with that label. And I don't. So again, I'm just at a point where I'm hungering for clarity, and I think that we have some wolves that are trying to move us away from this doctrinal place. And because of that, I would like to select some language that would give us a little bit more of a firm place to break. However, we have denominations that are so clear on this and recognizing homosexuality is a grave sin, who ordain homosexual pastors and priests. And how do they violate their own documents? Because ultimately, if the people don't believe their documents and the documents are hard to change, they just ignore the documents.
Yeah, exactly.
And part of the reason we're in this trouble right now is we've kind of been ignoring our own documents for a little while, and it's been gaining momentum. And I think the issue right now is it was called out early enough to stop the movement. But just because we do this, it's not going to end our trouble. We have to continue to disciple people according to God's word, and continue to raise a generation of people who think biblically more and more opposed to what the world says is right.
100%. And with that, we need to wrap this up for the day, because I think this is one of the longer ones that we have done, man. It's been a little time that we've been going through this, but we just want to talk through what's coming up and kind of what to expect as next week happens, because there's some news that'll be coming out of New Orleans. And so, Andrew, I appreciate you being down there, and look forward to kind of getting a report to us at OTXNT when we get together in about a week or two. We'll figure out something, but we need to get on and talk for sure. So,
and there's always a chance the issues we're talking about will be eclipsed by some grand thing that we don't even see coming, because it is a political meeting.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So it'll be fun to talk about it afterwards too.
Yeah, so lots of other things. Like there's a president's race that's going to be heating up too. That'll be an interesting one, and we can talk more about that next time. But this seems to be at least what the big one, what we think is going to be the big issue going into it, because it's generated the most. I said drama, right? It's been the biggest story. So anyways, let's close out, and we'll be done, and we'll see you in a couple weeks on OTXNT together. So let's do it. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. Hey, thanks for listening. Hey, please, if you're not done already, like, subscribe, all that stuff helps with the disbursement of this video or this audio that you're listening to. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you're part of the SBC, share this with other pastors. That's one way to get around the algorithm too, is to share and not just like her, because it, I hope that what we said has some value. Maybe you want to share it. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. You can disagree with us, but you can share it too. I don't care. Let's have that conversation. So, all right, we're out.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.